Alright. Well, I just saw the Evil Dead remake. Biggest sack of shit I ever seen. Probably the worst remake. Like, this is 2013's equivalent of the Thing remake. I couldn't even keep a straight face, I'm sorry. That was mean. I apologize. Evil Dead is actually really damn good. Um, Understandably, you could, there's reservations, as to, why remake something that's already good? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. There's not much point of remaking something if there's nothing to improve on. And so, a remake of Evil Dead, could come off as very questionable, and understandably so. Um, this one very much so pulls back on the camp factor or the silly factor, and goes. It's an outright gore fest, like just left and right. It's like a roller coaster ride, and or okay, here's a way of putting it. It's kind of like the Pirates of the Caribbean ride at Disneyland. Only instead of you'll stop and look at the little spots of pirates. Instead, it's little gore sideshows. You're like, oh, look at that, such and such intestine being pulled out of his urethra. That's nice. Oh, hey, look at stuff like that. That's very much what it is. If you're going into this for plot, you're going into this for the wrong reason. This is not a plot movie. It never was much of a plot movie. The Evil Dead it's what? People go out to a cabin and all hell just breaks loose. Now they do actually try to add something to that with this, with the book, but they kind of forget about it later, but I don't really mind. Again, this is not a plot movie. This is a spectacle movie. This is something that you see with a big audience, an audience that really, that will really eat it up, you know what I mean? This is a fun movie. This is the kind of movie that's fun to see with a crowd, because you can all just collectively at certain parts. You know what I mean? I would say it's okay. Well, as long as we're talking about the factor and the grossness, the effects in this, good God, they are absolutely they're spectacular. They're out and out spectacular. This beats the crap out of any any CG fest since like the early 2000s and mid 90s. Jesus, and all the horror movies now that, I'm sorry, horror movies, at least from the U.S., horror has been kind of in decline. Not in quantity, but in quality. And it's nice to see something with honest to God effort put into it. There's like maybe 2 shots of CG work in the whole thing, and the rest of it is all like what you're seeing is actually there kind of stuff. And it makes a difference. They really it always just pisses me off when you'll see like CG blood in a movie. It's like, really? You couldn't afford to just mix some red food coloring and corn syrup? Really? You couldn't afford that? You had to CG it? Or The Raven. I don't know if anybody's seen The Raven. It's on instant Netflix, but there's a part where a key goes into a lock and the key was CG. It's like, what the why? You couldn't get a key prop? Yeah, anyway. So all their money pretty much goes into the visual factor in this, and it pays off because the visuals are fantastic. Not just the effects, but just the way the movie looks. It's got a very despair kind of feeling to it, and it's great. Were there any problems with the movie? Are there any downfalls to it? Sure. Yeah. It's for one. It's got a bit of a pacing problem. Especially in the third act, it has a couple of false endings, or it feels like it's about to wrap up, and then it keeps going, and you're like, okay, here we go. Now we're gonna, now it's gonna keep going. Okay, let's wrap it up. It doesn't get too bad. It's nowhere near Lord of the Rings bad or anything like that. But it does have the third act, a little bit of a pacing problem. Not enough to break the movie, but just enough that you do kind of notice it, which is weird because it's only an hour and a half movie. All in all, it's shorter than your average movie. It's like rundown length, but even still, a little bit of a pacing thing. Another thing is that the character, I couldn't remember a single thing about any of them except for the main girl. I couldn't tell you their names. I couldn't tell you any distinguishing features about any of them. Absolutely nothing. And let me clarify before you go down to the comments and start correcting me. When I say qualifying features, what I mean is something that isn't their physical appearance or their job or like their profession. So if you're gonna go down the comments, be like, "What about hipster Jesus guy that was a teacher?" That's not it. That's not his a character thing. I mean, like, I couldn't tell you who they were as a person. You know, your job doesn't define you. I couldn't tell. I couldn't tell you anything about any of the characters. I didn't. They weren't terrible. Excuse me. They weren't terrible. But when you can't write a memorable character, that's when you end up with a bland character, that's almost as bad as just writing an out and out bad character. Because I mean, like, look at the villains in the Karate Kid movies. They're terribly written, but I mean, you remember them, don't you? You remember the Cobra Kais and the crazy nut bar instructor, you know. But I like that. I like that. You remember that guy, right? Now, so yeah, horribly written, but you remember them. The people in Evil Dead, I don't remember a single freaking thing about them. Also, what they build to in the third act, I'm trying to keep it as spoiler-free as possible. But if someone could tell me what that was in the third act, what we were seeing, what that thing was, I would really appreciate it, because I have no idea what it was or what it was supposed to signify. And okay, so if you really put a gun to my head and said, name things that are wrong with the Evil Dead remake or reboot, whatever you want to call it, I would say characters are bland and boring, except for the main girl. She did a good job acting. The rest of them are kind of just, but they didn't really have anything to do. So I don't know how much of it is their fault and how much of it is the writer's fault. It's that gray area. I can't. It's tough. I'd have to think about it a little bit more. But other characters don't care. Boring characters. Pacing issue in the third act. And then the third one isn't necessarily a bad thing. In fact, I don't even know if I call it. It's just unfortunate that this movie is in the uncomfortable position of necessarily having to be compared to the other movies, the Sam Raimi films. And that's a really uncomfortable position to be in, because people have a lot of love and respect for those. And when your new movie by necessity is required to be compared to something of such high caliber, or I guess something that's regarded with high opinion, it can be tough. It really can. This is a different beast altogether, though. This is kind of the movie that they would have ended up with the first Evil Dead if they had had like a budget and, you know, the right effects team and technology and stuff like that. So this is very much, and people will very quickly go, get very fanboyish about these movies and be like, "Oh, it's not like Evil Dead. It's too serious." It's like, you guys know that the first one was fairly serious, right? The one you're remembering is Evil Dead 2, the campier, sillier one. You know that, right? You can distinguish that in your brain. And people don't seem, the reason that people love the originals as much as they do is because they suck. And I don't mean like they're bad movies. I mean like because on a technical level, they're bad movies. Everything looks really cheap and shoddy. The sound effects the effects in general are not that great. The acting is so over the top. Stories practically not like that. They're technically bad movies, but that they tackle it with such passion and is part of its charm. And they pull it off, and you end up seeing a lot of surreal stuff that you don't see in a lot of movies. That goes to a lot of places you're not really used to. That's part of its charm. So for this new one to come out with actual effort and technical backings, like, you really shouldn't be that quick to judge immediately. Like, the like just knowing that this new Evil Dead is out there should not offend you. That's too close-minded. This was definitely one of the better horror movies in recent memory. It's one of the few horror remake, reboot, whatever the hell you want to call it. One of the few that actually like works. I don't like it as much as the originals. You know, the others are just so surreal and weird that, again, that's its charm. I like the other originals better, but I still liked this one, and this could have so easily gone wrong. So I encourage you all to go out and see it. I encourage you to see it with a crowd. Bring your own crowd. Like, make this like a group thing. Don't go by yourself. I made that mistake. And as I was getting into it, I'm like, oh man, I wish there was just like either a bunch of my friends or like a big crowd, one or the other. Don't make that mistake. Go see this with a crowd of some kind, whether it's a bunch of your friends or whatever. Go see it. Like, this thing needs supporting. I think maybe if this gets the support that it needs. I mean, I know they're already going to make sequels, but I mean, if it gets the kind of support that it needs, that it should, we'll start to see more movies like this being made. Things with actual like effort to them, less CG, more just like out and out wacky, because it is a little wacky here and there. It's not campy, but I mean it is over the top still. Yeah, I would encourage people to go out and see it. That's pretty much it. I don't have... Again, trying to keep it as spoiler-free as possible. I think I did a pretty good job. Just go see it. Evil Dead.